Hey everybody, this is the fourth here, and welcome to part 2 of my Hardstyle kick series. Now, if you haven't watched part 1, go to the playlist now, the link will be in the description, because otherwise you're missing out on some pretty important details. Alright, so let's get started. In this part, I'm going to be explaining to you how to process your original kick sound with distortion and other kind of effects to start getting the character of a hardstyle kick. Okay, so here's my kick sound. And I want to link it to a mixer track. Except I want to link it to an empty mixer track. Now, the most fundamental effects that you'll be using while making your hardstyle kick are EQ and distortion. And you can make an entire kick using just these two effects alone. So you'll see here I have my EQ, and then I'm going to put on the distortion. And what you'll end up doing is layering multiple EQs and distortions in a chain to really get that hardstyle sound. And then you'll play with the settings, and the EQ is really important. You'll want to use kind of drastic curves to really shape the sound and give the kick its unique character. So for the first EQ, I found that it's a really common technique to boost a notch in a certain frequency range to help give your kick its original tone. So you can see it kind of changes the original sound of the kick. And if I use a more narrow band, you can hear it has a bit of that talk, that punch sound already. And you know, where you set this band to be frequency-wise is where that punch sound is going to be. And you don't have to do this with the first EQ. It's just something that I found to be very common. You could just shape the sound however you want. But usually I do something like that for the first EQ. And then after that, it's really, there's no set way of doing it. It's really going to be a lot of playing around with the EQ bands and the distortion parameters to shape the sound until you get it to sound how you want. And you can just keep going with EQ and distortion. And it's really common to EQ out some of the bass each time because, the more distorted you get, the more bass you'll end up having. And as you can hear, if I don't EQ out any of the bass, it starts to become almost too distorted. But really it's just too much bass is going into that distortion and kind of canceling out the character that the other frequencies were giving the kick. And you can hear it sounds really square, so you cut out the bass some. And you can continue to shape the kick how you want. And of course, it's really good to use other kinds of distortions. So rather than just a clipping distortion every time, you might play around with certain other distortion types. Like Camel Crusher is a pretty cool distortion plugin. And you can hear that it's getting a more unique sound. But you can also do wave shaping distortion. And just experiment with different distortion types and different settings. And really, it's all about playing around and adjusting parameters until you get the sound you want. Now, a specific type of distortion that is very useful in making your hardstyle kicks is multi-band distortion. And a good example of a multi-band distortion unit is Homicide. And what it allows you to do is distort different frequency ranges independently of one another. So if I wanted to, I could distort just the lows, or I could distort just the highs. And right now it's set to distort nothing. But you can see if I turn on some distortion here and adjust the bands, it really helps you get a different character. And having a certain kind of distortion in just a frequency range in the low mids can help you get a bouncy sound. And distorting the high end separately can add a lot more crispness to it. And you can hear that happening. It has a lot more crispness now. But another thing that you can get from multi-band distortion is if you use a very narrow band and distort it quite a bit, you can kind of get a powerful talk sound just from that. So here's an example. You can hear it has a really powerful talk sound at about 500 hertz. And this effect chain is really simple. It's a multi-band distortion unit. This is a stock-only distortion that Quincy made, and I'll have a link to where you can download this and follow him and all that stuff. But you can see in here I have a really narrow band. It's this one right here. And it's just been distorted quite a bit. And that's what gets that really punchy sound. And you can hear if I take that band down, the talk sound is a lot less apparent. So if I mute that band, it sounds like this. And that's really aggressive. It's almost like a hardcore sounding talk. But yeah, that's just another technique you can use with multi-band distortion. Okay, so the next kind of effects that I found useful in some cases are your chorus, your flanger, and your phaser. And these just really help give some more movement in your kick if you set them to move, but also that kind of filter effect that happens when you are having some amount of phase cancellation really gets you a different character, and sometimes you'll really like that character. So I'm just going to show you an example using a phaser, but you can play with a chorus and a flanger as well. But the one thing you're going to want to do is turn the track to mono. And you can hear already the one kind of, I'm not sure if I'd call it a downside, but it kind of is, to using these effects is because of the movement, you're going to have the kick sound differently each time you play it. But the cool thing about FL Studio is if you use the stock effects, then it's going to sound the same every time you play it from the start. So you can hear when I restart the pattern, it sounds the same each time. Whereas if I just play it, it sounds different every time. So that's just something cool about FL Studio's plugins. But if you're not using FL Studio, or if you're using some kind of plugin that doesn't restart each time the pattern is played, what you can do is turn off the sweep frequency. And you can hear now, even when I play it on its own, there's no movement. And after that you can just adjust the parameters to see how it shifts the sound. So yeah, you can get some pretty cool different kinds of sounds from doing that. And an alternative to using kind of a phaser or a chorus is to use unison. If your synthesizer has a unison option or multiple voices, you can do that as well. And you just want to make sure the pan is at 0. And if you have a higher pitch, I found it's really cool for raw kicks. And you'd of course want to touch that up some, but it's a really dark, raw sound. But with less pitch, it's less dark. So yeah, the unison is a good alternative to using a chorus or a phaser. Okay. Now, if you run out of room for effects, like I have, what you can do is just route the one track into a new track. And so in FL Studio, all you have to do is have your original track selected, and then right-click one of these arrows and route to this track only. And then from that track, I could route to a further track, and so on. But in FL Studio, what you could also do is use a patcher. And this way, if you're using patcher, not only can you route your sound through as many effects as you want, you'll also be able to, because if I want to insert a new effect here, it's going to be kind of hard. I'll have to transport some of these out into the next mixer track. But in patcher, I could just easily put it in between other effects. Okay, so now another very useful effect is to use an envelope editor. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll explain that more here. So what I like to use is the Fruity Love filter. And I just open up the default preset, turn the filter off, and go into the volume pattern. And you can create a volume pattern to, really what you're doing is you're reducing the sustain of the sound after your effects. So, if your sound is starting to get too loud, too distorted, but you still want to have more distortions to just shape the sound, this is something you might want to do. You can hear it really just adds a nice volume envelope to it. And there should be ways to do this in other DAWs, but if you're having trouble, you can honestly just automate the post gain on one of your effects, or automate the mixer volume to give it this envelope. And then this way you can add more EQs and distortion without it getting to sound too distorted. And this isn't something I use too often, but I do use it occasionally. And now the last specific effect I'm going to be talking about before I start giving you some tips on this stage of the making a hardstyle kick is a bit crusher. So bit crushers are useful to add some, fuzz to your sound, or just a little bit of a crisp high end. The way you can do this is if you lower the bit depth, it'll give you the fuzz. So I'm going to turn on the bit crusher, and you can see I have a pretty low bit depth here. It gives you a lot of fuzz. And you can change the mix level of that if you don't want it to be quite that extreme. And then for the crisper high end, what you want to do is change the downsampling amount. And you can hear it kind of adds that ringing sound. And it also, if your kick has a lot of high end already, it'll make it sound more kind of lo-fi. But if your kick is kind of lacking that high end, it can add some, just some high end information to help it cut through the mix. So this kick here has a bit crusher on it to help that happen. And it's really subtle, but it really helped give the kick more of a high-end sound. So yeah. And then of course you can change the mix level on that too. Okay, and then other than these effects I've explained, you can really use whatever you want. And the key to getting a unique kick sound is playing around and seeing what different effects cause the character to sound like. So an example of this is recently I tried using a vocoder to make a kick, just to see how that could change the character. And here's the kick I made with it. Oops, sorry. And here's the kick I made with it. And you can see in the effect chain, I have a vocodex. And I'd never heard of anybody using a vocoder to make a hardstyle kick before, but it really helps you change the character of the sound quite a bit. So you can hear even if I make changes in just the vocoder, it'll change the sound a lot. So you can get a lot of different sounds out of just changing the vocoder. So, just really get creative with it. Play around. Don't worry too much about getting a perfect kick right away, and just keep playing around, adjusting parameters, and eventually you'll get something awesome. Okay, so now I'm going to give you guys a few tips on how to make this process most successful. Now, the biggest tip I have to offer you guys is to save new versions. So, I might save this kick project here. And then if I tweak it some, I might save it here again. In FL Studio, all you have to do is go to File, Save New Version, or Control-N. But you'll have to figure out how to do it. You might just have to save as if you use a different DAW. I'm not sure how it works with other workstations. But this is really important because that way it'll allow you to go back into your projects. So, if you start doing things to your kick and it starts sounding really bad, you can easily go back and start again at the point where it still sounded good, rather than, otherwise you're just kind of stuck with what you've done. And also you can use these past projects to take different parts of the kick out from. So at one point in your kick project, you might have a really good talk sound that you want to use. But the tail doesn't sound that good. And once you start putting more effects on to get the tail to sound good, the talk will start sounding really bad maybe. And if you've saved new versions quite often, you'll be able to go back and get that talk sound and then layer that good talk sound with the good tail sound, rather than having to figure out how to get it back. And then another reason is, you can go back to these older versions and process them in a different way and get completely different kick sounds out of the same beginning. And that said, another important tip I have for you guys is to, use the same project and get multiple kicks out of it. Because you can hear, with this example, just by going back into the effect chain and changing different parameters, I can get very different sounding kicks. And I've actually used this one effect chain to get quite a few different kicks that all sound very different. So, definitely go back through and not only to get different kicks, but you can also just make these adjustments to get one kick, because, after you have all these effects, your kick might sound a certain way, and then you change one parameter and you find, oh, this kick sounds a lot better. So, always go back and, play with different things, even play with the settings of the original kick. And just go back, change settings, and see how it changes the sound. Because once you have all these effects on, it'll change, minor adjustments in the past effects will change the sound character a lot more. Now, another tip I have for you is to leave room on each mixer track. Especially if you're not using Patcher, or if you're using a program where it's not as easy to kind of move your effects around, because you might end up wanting to go back and insert effects between other effects. So you see here I have plenty of room, so I can move these down and insert a chorus if I wanted to. But if I had filled this up and there was no space to put your chorus, then you'd kind of have to do some things and spend more time than you would have to if you had left that space. So something I like to do is I'll usually start off with EQ and then distortion, and then if I add more effects, I'll usually leave a space between each EQ and distortion layer. So that way, if I decide I want to add a chorus or homicide or whatever else, I can just do that really easily. So, it'll look something like this. And then I might even not fill this out. I might leave more space at the end of it. And then route it to a new mixer track early, just so that if I want to, I have plenty more slots to put stuff in. Okay, now another tip is you have to think about layering. Layering is going to be one of the later steps, and it's really important because you might have your kick where you like a certain character of it at one point, but it doesn't have enough of another character. So maybe your kick has a really solid sound in the mid-range that you like, but it doesn't have enough high end. That doesn't mean that you have to keep processing your kick sound until you get that high end, because if you process it too much, you'll lose that original character in the mids that you really like. So what you could do instead is render that mid part out, and then layer it with something that's more high end. So here's an example of that, just this kick. I didn't actually render it out, but I did do layering. You can see that this mixer track goes through both insert 3 and then this track as well. Now, if I turn this track off, you'll hear that this is kind of a high-end layer. And if I don't route this track through this one anymore, you can hear just that high-end layer. Because I really liked the character of this sound. But it really needed more crunch, it needed more high-end. So I just layered it. And then another example is with the talk sounds. So if you hear this kick, it has a really weak talk, something that you really want to have in your final track. But the tail is quite good. It's nice and bouncy. It'd probably be used for a euphoric track. And you can hear what I've done is I've layered this tail with talk, and you'll hear the kick sounds quite good. And so you don't have to get a perfect kick from this distortion part, because you can definitely do a ton of layering. Some people do more layering than other people. For me, it just depends on the kick. I have gotten pretty much complete kicks from this step alone. but usually I do end up layering at least a little bit just to finish out the kick sound. Now, if you're a beginner, this whole process is going to be a little bit difficult, and what I would recommend is if you're spending a lot of time on one kick and you can't seem to get it to turn out well, I'd recommend you save that project, take a break, come back, and then start a new project. And this will help you just get used to how the different effects modify the character of the sound. And you'll get used to the process of creating a kick. Even if it doesn't turn out well, you'll still be practicing, and starting from scratch will also give you more of a chance to get a good kick. Because when I was starting out, I definitely gave up on some kicks, and I had to start over. And on this new kick project, I made a great kick surprisingly quickly. Whereas on the old one, I just couldn't get anything good from it. So if you're a beginner, that's something I recommend you do. But once you start getting more, proficient at making kicks, what I would say is, don't give up on a kick project. Because once you're more experienced, as long as you keep changing effects, you could add things, remove things, go back in and change parameters. But as long as you keep doing that, you should be able to get a great sound eventually. And that's something I do a lot, is I'll go back into my effect chain and make changes until I really get the sound that I want. And that way, once you're more proficient, you'll be practicing other skills, and that way you don't have to give up on a kick project, and you can save time by doing that. And now, the final tip I have for you guys is, if you use FL Studio, when you export your kick, there's a decent chance that it might sound very different from how it sounds in FL Studio. And, that's not going to happen all the time. But if it does happen, what I recommend you do is record it internally in FL Studio. So if I wanted to record this kick, this kick. This is the final mixer track before it goes to the master, and I have a soft clipper to keep the peaks in check. So what I would do is I would put on an Edison, and you really want to just get one kick sound out at a time. And then I would just record that one kick. And then you can click here to drag it in, and it will be a dragged sample. Or you can export the file, and save it however you want. So now we're ready to move on to part 3. Thanks for watching my tutorial video. I hope you found it to be helpful. If you want to learn more, be sure to subscribe to my channel so you can watch new videos as soon as I upload them. After that, check out the Beat School website. I'll have the link in the description. All my tutorials are organized on the site so that you can easily find what you need by browsing through the different categories. There are also a ton of awesome resources to help you in every aspect of music production. And if you want to help support me, you can buy any of my sample packs, preset packs, or project files for only $5 or less. This gets you some great sounds for a great price and allows me to spend more time making these tutorials and working on the website. Thanks again for watching my video, and have a great day.